CGA Tour, a podcast unlike any other. Now your host, Calvin Alexander.
Welcome back to the latest episode of the CGA Tour podcast. As always here, I'm your host, Calvin Glen Alexander. And on tonight's podcast, I'm joined by Jory Zemanek, who is the Director of Partnerships at Breakaway Data, former coworker, Alabama alum, University of San Francisco Masters alum too, right? Am I getting everything in there?
Yeah, man, you got it.
Nice. Well, I know it's been a while here, haven't caught up with you, but want to ask you about the Alabama football season. But first off here, kind of going off of my recent tangent of asking everyone I know in sports what they're doing, what their advice is, and how they got to where they are today. Love to kick it off with that. So, mind giving me a little bit on your background here? I know it, but of course for all the listeners here, and kind of get us up to speed.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me, man. We've been talking about doing this for a while, and so it was finally time for me to hop on. I grew up in San Francisco. My dad was a cameraman and worked in sports, and so from a very young age, he would bring me to arenas, and I got to see that there was a whole kind of back-end business side to sports, and I kind of learned that, I could make that my profession. So I played football in high school, but had some injuries and just obviously was not going to play at the next level. I'm 5'6", so I went to Alabama for my undergrad. And even though a bunch of people asked me if I was playing there, I didn't. But I did get to work a lot in the athletic department. I wanted to be able to kind of get some experience at a place that very similarly resembled a pro team, so that afterwards I had some good stuff on my resume and some experience at that level. And I think at that time it was really about figuring out, okay, what don't I want to do as much as what I do want to do and what I'm good at. And so I got a kind of really a whole masterclass in college athletics and, marketing and sponsorship and ticket sales and activation, and realized that, hey, sales was really kind of my calling. I liked, meeting new people and making money. And so I kind of just focused myself kind of in sales, and sold, tickets for all of the different teams at Alabama. And then when it was time to graduate, it was kind of like, okay, where's the next inside sales class at a pro team? And I had gone back and forth between, New York teams or back to San Francisco. But ultimately I knew that I wanted to get my master's in sports management. And a lot of the times when I was, stalking some of these Bay Area sports executives on LinkedIn, I saw that a lot of these people went to this University of San Francisco sport management program. And so I kind of locked in that that's what I was going to do. And that right after school, I was going to continue into that and kind of knock it out. The value there especially was the alumni network. I thought that the stuff that you would get kind of in from the textbook or in the classroom was going to be same or similar depending on, different schools. But really at the end of the day, it was about the connections. And USF was an amazing program. I started that right after grad school and at the same time that I started inside sales with the Oakland A's. So I did those hand in hand and just kind of grinded it out for 2 years. One of the big things about the USF program is that they have you do an internship along with your program so that you can really kind of correlate and transcribe some of the stuff that you're learning in the classroom to your office and vice versa. And the core, which was the Oakland A's inside sales program, was new. And in a sense, it was, let's say, 75% sales focused. And the other 25% was in a similar way, trying to get you exposure to some of the different departments so that they were molding our class as like a holistically well-rounded sports business group. And whether you were really good in sales and you got promoted after IS into a sales role, or if sales wasn't really your thing, you were still a very talented, qualified individual that they had brought in that kind of acted as a feeder system or like a minor league team to some of the other departments like community or marketing or sponsorship. So that was something that no other team was really doing. And so that kind of combined with what I thought at the time was the future of the Oakland A's and getting a ballpark built at Howard Terminal, it was an exciting time. And I learned a lot about like what really good office team culture looks like. And we, went up to Seattle for a playoff game and we got on a boat to sail over to the Giants Stadium for Battle of the Bay. Like it was just a really fun time and like a great way for me to kind of start my sports career. obviously COVID came in and kind of act baseball at the time. And so I had some time off to kind of figure out what I wanted to do. And I kind of just took a chance on myself that SoFi Stadium was opening up soon. I had always wanted to work in football. That's just kind of where my passion was. Baseball is great. I did internships with the Giants during summers at college. And I think that's an amazing experience, but 81 games is a grind. And I tried to be kind of that guy that was working at all of them. And after a while, it just kind of really took a toll, to be completely honest. So took a chance that, hey, SoFi, the Chargers probably needed some help on the sales side and that there could be a really good opportunity for me. And moved down to Redondo Beach. I live right across the street from the beach, and looking back, I'm like, wow, that was a great move. But at the time it was really scary because I had kind of tried to back channel my way and talk to guys like Mike Forrester or Brian Bracci, who before they were really ready to hire, they kind of knew who I was and knew that I could do this job. And so then it kind of became a waiting game. But then the time finally came and we all loaded up together in June in that suite and did our training, and it was kind of off to the races, right? Like SoFi, everyone had seen the pictures and videos, and coming out of COVID, people just really wanted to get out of their house and go back to live sports, right? And certainly the team, although there were some obstacles to overcome with the move from San Diego and people being kind of bitter about that, there was a lot of excitement about Justin Herbert and kind of the new era of Chargers football. And the stadium kind of sold itself, right? Like I went from trying to sell probably the worst stadium in the country to the newest and best stadium. And it was much more like, okay, hey, look, there's not a bad seat in the house, but these are available, and it's like, okay, take my credit card. So it was fun. And certainly I think being at games kind of in that first year of COVID was interesting. Being able to go to the Super Bowl, like that was an amazing experience. College football national championship, some concerts, and just some of the stuff that was on the horizon here in LA with World Cup and Olympics. I wish I probably would have stayed a little bit longer, but at some point all the seats were gone to sell, right? Like we had done our job and it was on to the next project, or that's kind of how the Legends model works. And for me, I kind of took inventory of like what's most important. And even though like a stadium like Buffalo or Nashville or maybe Washington, like some of those were kind of on the horizon, I was like, hey, you know what? I really like being in LA, and I like my lifestyle here, and I like being close to home to the Bay Area. And if I wasn't, married and had a dog, maybe it'd be easier for me to pick up and go do that. So there was kind of a lot of reflection in terms of, what am I looking for in terms of like the industry opportunity, right? Like what's taking off in the next few years? What is it that I'm actually like doing or selling? And then how does it fit in with just kind of my lifestyle? Like I'm lucky now that our office is close to home. We're in LA. It's a really good market. And so, I'm not in the middle of nowhere where there's not a lot of opportunities. Like it's nice to be in LA. So that's kind of like a jump skip over all of my career stuff. I'm happy to dive into anything else, but that's kind of where life has taken me the past few years.
I think that's awesome because one, my dad makes the same kind of joke that you kind of got to, but working less games, right? Like I've worked less and less games every single time I moved to a new team. USFL, we only have 6 home games, 1 playoff game. NFL, 10 home games, maybe a playoff or more. NBA before then with the Pistons, it's 40 some odd. And then, before then was Padres and baseball, which, the 80-game home grind and inside sales especially. But, even after that, a lot of respect for you there for the A's, because that's Petco Park, I got to say.
Yeah.
How the teams were doing, Padres and A's back in 2018, I think the A's were probably doing a little bit better than the Padres. They almost had to be. But still selling
right, yeah, we had a wild playoff.
But still selling Petco Park to a bunch of San Diegans is not usually the hardest thing ever, comparatively. So I think we're both fighting some similar battles there. But I do have to say, selling the Pistons in Detroit, little tough. They were going for the number 1 overall pick and trading everyone away. But I sung groups. So it was a bunch of Celtics fans and Cavs fans and, I want to see Giannis play or whatever too, right? Like, when's Curry coming into town? Like it was, that was more the model there as well too. Making sure, am I going to get a refund if LeBron doesn't play? I'd be like, no, it's going to be a game time decision and you'll no matter what see the Lakers. And then of course, COVID killed all of those 6 premium or silver tiered games we had. So it's kind of funny there.
Yeah. I will say that the A's very much taught me to like control the controllables in the sales process, right? Like there's nothing that I could do about the stadium. We put in some new premium stuff that, caught a little heat. But for the most part, it was like, how can you really communicate that value outside of everything that's happening on the field? And it's funny, I've kind of, when I was at the A's, everything was compared against the Giants, right? Like the on-field success, the amenities of the stadium, and the A's kind of always felt like that redheaded stepchild. And then I came down to LA, and it was kind of similar with the Rams and Chargers, right? But I also kind of always loved to kind of embrace that underdog, kind of that chip on your shoulder, right? And at SoFi Stadium, it was a little bit easier because it was like, hey, look, it's the exact same stadium. Like they are more expensively priced and they have less inventory. And so that was actually kind of like a silver lining that we really were able to kind of hammer home in that kind of weird dichotomy of the teams and the kind of competition in the marketplace. But, certainly I think it can be tough to deal with some of those fans that only really care about that. Or when you're talking to a business and you're comparing to like the Warriors, when they built Chase Center, it was like, well, damn, now I have to compete with 2 world-class stadiums. And when you're a business that doesn't care as much about what's happening on the field, it's a lot harder to kind of justify that. So I don't know, man, I still follow all the Vegas moving trilogy that is going on. It doesn't seem like it's a completely done deal that they're going to be in Vegas. We'll see if a shovel ever gets put in the ground. It would just be really sad for Oakland to kind of lose all those teams. But I think John Fisher's the real problem. If you're asking me personally, like yes, the Oakland City Council and government is kind of tough to deal with. California building on the water is just hard to do. But I think a lot of the issues that they're facing now are kind of self-imposed by ownership, which is sad to see. I still have some friends who work there. I don't know how they do it, but I feel for them. I couldn't imagine taking some of those calls or trying to pitch anything right now there. So we'll see. I hope maybe they sell the team, they get a ballpark in Oakland, and everyone's happy. But after seeing all the Niners fans, which I love down at the Vegas preseason game the other day, you're only going to see more of that where you don't have kind of this. Now, the Vegas Golden Knights do a really good job because they've really grassroots homegrown that fan base.
When they're an expansion team too, so they weren't moving anyone, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know that the deal makes sense in Vegas they're getting this free government money, but in terms of like all the development they wanted to do and the size of land, it just doesn't make sense. So we'll see. I'm still kind of hopeful about Oakland, but I'm also not holding my breath.
Yeah, I'd say through both of our careers, the very similar thing I would think is that how many times were you selling a hardcore A's fan? Like, I wasn't selling a hardcore Padres fans most of the day. I mean, granted, I was an IS and you moved all the way up to, business development with the A's, right? Or even premium. And so with the Padres, like I'm smiling, dialing, hitting 125 to 100 calls a day, really trying to just get that guy who brought his son out for the Cubs, Padres and from Chicago to buy a 10-game pack or 20-game blue pack, which right. I now know the Padres don't even sell. But that was very similar with the Chargers, where it was like, hey, you're a fan of football, or hey, you're a fan of baseball, come out to this awesome stadium. That's what I was able to really kind of latch onto, was like the idea of selling. It wasn't like I was selling Justin Herbert in the future of the Chargers. I was selling SoFi Stadium, where the Super Bowl is going to be, or where the Super Bowl just was. And then, with the A's, like what kind of the similarities did you see in selling? Just because I went from being able basically to go, you can buy any seat in Petco Park, almost. Now you can't at all, so it sounds weird that I'm even saying that. But at the time, 2018, the navy blue and white Padres, it was definitely a different time, and was selling any seat in the house. Whereas when we got to SoFi, we quickly learned we're like learning through all of the different seating types if they become available, but they really aren't any available that are the real good price breaks that would just be easy to flip. It was, hey, we've got one or the other, and sometimes we don't even have the other.
And it was the most expensive or the cheapest.
Right.
Well, so in Oakland, I will say there are a lot of Oakland fans, despite what you see on TV, like all throughout the Bay Area, East Bay, like there are a lot of fans. And like I've seen like at that 2018 wildcard game, like the place was packed, right? Like for the Giants game, we set an attendance record inside the Coliseum one time. So the fans are there. I can empathize, and that year after year, the favorite, franchise player guys get traded away. At the time, though, they had kind of introduced like A's Access, which was this kind of like hybrid season ticket / like fan membership model. And so it offered a lot more flexibility in terms of like number of games and where you sit and discounts on parking, food, merchandise, all that kind of stuff. So that was hot, right? People were like, oh, that's a great deal. Team's getting better. And we sold a lot of that. They then axed that like after COVID because it was almost too much of a good deal. Like they were losing money on 50% off concessions. So they were definitely the fans, but it was kind of like pulling teeth to be like, hey, look, this is a new ownership group. This is a new era. Like things are going to be done differently here. And we're trying to make improvements to the Coliseum, and we're going to get a new ballpark. And so people kind of latched on to that. There was a lot more conversations about, your memories at the ballpark and talking about players and games versus talking with people at SoFi or like Chargers fans. We kind of missed that gap of where they were really bitter, right? Like when they were in the Playa office and they were trying to call them like right after they announced they're moving, that would have been terrible. We were at the point where some of those people were starting to come back around. And then, like you said, people just LA, hey, I don't really have a team one way or the other, but my kid likes Patrick Mahomes and the Chargers game includes that. So we're going to buy Chargers. Or like it was much more about what are the other events that you have access to at SoFi outside of just your 10 football games. And so just certainly kind of that aspect was a little less, I guess, fan specific, and certainly a lot more business focused, which, sometimes was harder, sometimes was easier. But at the end of the day, like the stadium kind of spoke for itself. Right. And so that was something that we really did not have.
Yeah, that's something that, in Birmingham here, the stadium, funny enough, opened up the same year, 2020, and the first year it was played and was 2021. So it's the same age as SoFi, but it's much different, of course, and the stadiums because UAB plays it versus Chargers and Rams and Taylor Swift having 7 different tours, tour nights come through.
Yeah,
but I just think it's like. The whole SoFi campus now being built out with the Clippers' new stadium, across the street, having that all a row of like the Forum, then SoFi, and then the Clippers, crypto.com, is what Staples is. But I forget what the Clippers is going to be named. Intuit Dome. Thank you. That's going to be just an incredible like campus of events there going on at all times, right?
Yeah, it's wild. I drove over there the other day for the preseason game, and just even in the off season, the amount of kind of the ancillary development that we always kind of talked about or saw renderings of is actually like really coming to life. I was going to say about Alabama, like selling tickets there. It's funny because like the way that was set up was that I was calling people who had been on like the wait list for like 50 years. And it was like, hey, ring, ring, today's your lucky day. You can buy season tickets. And like, granted, they were way up top, but people was like, immediately, here's my credit card. Right. And so that was completely different in terms of like, they're obviously making some new upgrades to Bryant Denny, but again, the brand is so powerful. The fandom was so powerful there that it was just, like slinging it. It was easy. So it's interesting to kind of challenge yourself in terms of different sales environments, let's call it. And I think it only kind of just helps kind of hone your skills, get a little bit better so that, now I look back, I'm like, thank God I have that experience because it's helping me kind of in my sales process or my sales style now.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the one other thing that we both have touched on that I do want to always ask somebody is like, if you could work for the best team ever, like the team that has the longest waiting list, like how much more enjoyable would that be versus it would be a different job than what we're doing at SoFi. Like it would be much more like at Alabama where you're just kind of not taking orders because you're still upselling people on stuff. There's other things they can do. I'm sure there's like a donation club, et cetera, et cetera. But at the same point, you call someone up, like if you work for the Cubs, my dad had, asked me, like, where would you want to work, right? And I was like, man, you know what? In my head, it'd be, oh, I'd love to work for the Cubs one day because they have a season ticket waiting list, because how easy would that be? You kind of look up the Cubs like staff, and there's just a bunch of service reps, right? They don't need actual people
Right.
selling,
Yeah.
because
Lakers, Packers, there's these teams that have these massive wait lists, and they don't really need to spend the money to hire because they know that, service reps can upsell them and just take care of it like that. And so, yeah, I thought about that too. Now, the new stadium, kind of that conversion process, I think is, if you're lucky, you can catch in on that. So like Chicago or Nashville, when you've already, or even Buffalo too, right? You've got this existing base of season ticket holders, you're moving into a new thing, and all of them have to get seated and you need help. So like, that's where, boom, you're crushing 100 seats a day. But that only lasts for so long, and that only happens every couple of years, right? So all of this kind of, it's a mixture of how kind of the stars line up in terms of when things are getting built, when teams are hiring, what team is hot on the field, and stuff like that. But I think, I am at the point where I'm like, okay, I feel like I've mastered like selling the season ticket, right? And kind of like the suite or group outings. And I kind of wanted to challenge myself to sell something else. And kind of what I'm doing now is still sports related, but kind of sport adjacent or sports supportive. And so I can actually enjoy my season tickets at SoFi and go to games and not have to be running around in a suit. And I can still go, be on the field and talk to athletes and coaches. But again, it's not this kind of like one dimensional, like I'm selling this one product to this kind of one or two groups of people. Now I kind of have evolved in terms of like what I'm selling, how I'm selling it. And it just feels kind of like a next progression in terms of like my sales career.
because I think the biggest thing for me is that to to work for a sports team, you've got to be able to graduate from college and then have the entire state, or whatever map is realistic of where you want to move to, what works out best with your personal life, financially, what makes sense too. But there's always these other opportunities, right? You don't have to work just like, growing up in Oklahoma, it's like, okay, there's one professional team, it's the Thunder. And of course they came when I was in 8th grade. So before then it was like, I'd have to leave the state to work in pro sports. But I think where you work now is such a great, idea for anyone who's in college or is thinking about going into working in sports, right? Like there's all these other avenues you can work in. So can you tell us more about Breakaway Data and what you do day to day too?
Yeah. It's funny. I always I heard that thing of like, hey, don't just think about the pro teams. Like there's a lot of other kind of ancillary things that have their hands. And I was kind of like brush that aside because I was very focused. Like I want to be in the front office. I want to wear a credential and, have all this stuff. And look, that was a great experience. But then after a while I was like, okay, I kind of want to do something a little bit different. And so this company, Breakaway Data, is an athlete data company. It's a startup that's been around for a couple of years. And actually, I when I was at SoFi, I prospected them because one of our co-founders used to be a Chargers coach. And I was like, hey, you guys live close to the stadium. You should, entertain your clients at SoFi. He's like, hey, we got the hookup on tickets already. But, if you're looking for a gig, we're looking for a salesperson. And so everything that we do is centered around the athlete and giving them ownership of all of their performance data. So I kind of bucket it into three things in terms of all of your game stats, everything that you do actually in game that's official. So like max preps or ESPN box score stuff, everything that you do from like a practice and training standpoint. So whether that's guys wearing GPS devices during practice or what they're doing in the weight room. And then any of your like wearable devices. So like Apple Watch, Oura Ring, Whoop, Garmin, we take and aggregate all of that performance data into one kind of digital player passport so that, for a couple of reasons, these guys have all of that right now. All of that is kind of fragmented or hard to access, or it has its own app and none of it communicates with each other. So consolidation so that you have kind of like a more holistic view of your body and how you're performing as an athlete. If you change teams or transfer schools or make it to the next level, like we're trying to kind of provide this way that you can take all of that with you, and worst case, you get injured, or you have actually this historical library of your performance and trading data that you can use as baselines. Obviously, the idea is to kind of dial into the 1% and kind of help you get better, and then also showcase yourself in a way that's a little bit more creative or innovative in a data-driven way to like pro scouts, as opposed to the traditional method of, huddle clips or kind of box scores on Twitter and stuff like that. So we're kind of creating a new category, like, to be completely honest. There's a lot of companies that do data collection for betting or for media, but no one that's really putting the athlete at the center of that kind of conversation. So we work with, elite pro level athletes. We have partnerships with almost all of the major like players associations for all the leagues, individual like NBA or NFL teams. Then we work our way down with like college teams. D1 football primarily has but what we do. Also like with camps. So like Elite 11 or USA Football, Overtime Elite, some of those, organizations that do combine or showcase camps. And then high schools. So high school coaches, high school athletes. We want to be able to bring kind of some next gen sports science, kind of sports innovation stuff down the funnel, so that guys who, now growing up, like your brother's age, are kind of used to seeing all the data, right? Like they've been playing Madden since they were born and they see the AWS web stats on the broadcast. And so we have a generation that's a little bit more data savvy and kind of expect this stuff. There's obviously like the whole Moneyball theory, right? And it's funny, even though that was like 20 years ago, there's still a lot of teams that are trying to catch up and actually starting to understand the value of investing in data and analytics. So there's a good amount of kind of education that I get to do on that part. But that's kind of primarily, I've been on here for 6 months. I handle all of our kind of like sales, on the US team side. We've got a couple of guys in the UK that handle a lot of like the Premier League, rugby, cricket. But for me, primarily focused on athletes and schools here in the US. And I've actually got to kind of dabble a little bit on the NIL stuff, which has been cool because when I was in Alabama and when I was in grad school, like it was this kind of conceptual thing and everyone was talking about it, but no one kind of had it figured out. And so now I'm like, oh wait, I gotta read these like contracts and these laws about like, can you pay high school athletes in like certain states for NIL, and what are monetization rules around that kind of stuff. And so that's been interesting to kind of, yes, I do sales, but like I'm kind of getting to wear different hats across a couple of different things. And that's been exciting.
I think that's awesome because, as you said, like my younger brother, I've got a youngest brother, 16, and he wants to know like, how does he compare as a goalie in the state of Oklahoma playing soccer, right? Like how, like, okay, yeah. So there's
amongst his peers and then to like the pro
exactly,
guys too,
yeah.
Right?
He wants to know how he compares, against everyone. And when he tells me, I think I'm one of the best in the state, I'm like, hey, you seem awesome to me, but like some he's on like 4 different 7,000 different soccer teams. And sometimes I'm like, hey, so what happened in this game? Because like the guys were really competitive, but you lost by 1 on some freak thing that looked like, wasn't even your fault. And in the other game, you guys win 8-0. And he's like, well, the level of competition we're against, and also the guys who like don't have a math test, the next day, who are able to show up for our team. Or if I'm playing on this team, these are the 07s versus the 08s or whatever it may be, right? Like there's so many different variables. So to have the data on hand just to go, okay, well, like Luke played at a 90. He played at.
Show me
exactly.
The data,
he played at a 90 this game, and then the next game he, has his 2K player score go up to 92, and the next game it goes down to 88 because that's how he's, get a good teammate grade and all that type of stuff. I think that's awesome though. I was taking some notes there.
We did with Jabril Cox at LSU a couple years ago. He tore his hamstring right before his pro day. And so we got a lot of feelings about the combine and does that actually give you a good depiction of how they're going to perform kind of in a game. So we were like, hey, you know what? We're going to take all of his GPS data from his season, some of his in-game stuff, and kind of create this, showcase infographic that told a much better story about him and his data and his performance in game, as opposed to some of the stuff that he would, record running around in his underwear on the field at the combine. And so that's a big piece is like, okay, hey, look, we're going to help you kind of aggregate and contextualize and visualize that data. And then you as an athlete are now empowered to kind of tell your story either about your performance or how you collaborate with a brand. Like we had an NFL or a college wide receiver who we basically used his GPS data from the season, and he went partnered with like a food delivery service. And there was a better kind of story, a better alignment, with him, kind of how much he ran and how much, miles for delivery, versus just like, hey, this person has a lot of Instagram followers and they're going to kind of push a product that maybe doesn't really resonate on a deeper level. Like I always think of that Dak Prescott Sleep Number commercial.
Oh yeah.
Like that's kind of teetering on like, hey, this is his athlete data in a commercial. And that's a great story packaged that way. I think we'll probably see a lot and more players say, hey, I want to be able to kind of do that with my data. And this is mine. I should at least be owning it, because you'd be surprised about most people don't realize that they don't own it. And a lot of the athletes know that it's being collected on them, but sometimes don't realize the value in having that. And like I'm talking with a lot of NFL agents now about like, hey, look, if the goal for your agency is like career longevity for your guys, yeah, it's great to see what they're doing on Sunday by the numbers, but like what are they doing Monday through Friday from like a wellness standpoint, right? Like are they tracking their sleep, their hydration, their nutrition, their soreness levels? Like let's kind of move into the next century here and kind of really focus in on measuring what matters, right? Like our goal here is, and this is what we do kind of more on the biomechanics side when we're actually on field, is really putting like objective data points to what's traditionally very like subjective eye tests, right? And so when you're measuring how someone, shoots a free throw or throws a football in 240 frames per second, you see everything from their big toe to their thumb and how that kind of kinematic sequence happens that you maybe wouldn't be able to see, or it happens so fast if you're just a coach kind of watching them go through a drill. So more and more emphasis on data, I think from the player side, from the coach's side, and just overall. And we kind of want to be there early to make sure that, hey, things go the right way, and the data ownership and privacy is, that we're on the right side of that, and that athletes are at the center of that conversation.
I think that's awesome overall, and definitely like a ton of untapped potential. I know, to refer back to myself a little bit, like I wanted to have a lot of data when I was trying to lose weight, right? Like how much, if I'm not stepping on the scale like every single day and I don't see like a trend line going down and I just do it once a week or once a month, then it's like, what's going on in between? Of course, you're not going to do that every hour of every day, but like doing it once a day is like, oh, okay, like now I know, like, yeah, I do weigh more in the mornings versus at night. So mentally I feel better, or whatever it is. It's usually the opposite actually. But, just knowing how you like regulate and just process the data, or data, either way. So that's awesome.
Yeah. It's all about, like your consistency, your discipline, having kind of the insights and the overall view into that. I think only makes you a better athlete. And there's some interesting opportunities down the road, like from what you can do with that. So that's why, I was really excited about Breakaway Data, because data just in general with sports, NIL, all of this is, I think, just going to be more and more of a focus. And then from a sales perspective, it was like, hey, look, I can come in here and kind of create this and figure out, how I want to run this, and get to wear a couple different hats, right? Like not every day is the same. And so being part of kind of a startup, I always knew that I wanted to kind of be more on the sports tech side than necessarily working for a team for like my entire life. I always thought it would kind of have something to do with VR. Like I was trying to do that at Alabama, like for recruiting stuff when I was there. And the sentiment around kind of new age tech, especially in college athletics, was like, hey, we don't want to be the first ones to do it, but we don't want to be the last ones to do it. And so I think I was, that was years ago. That was kind of a time where VR was still kind of novel and people were like, oh, that's kind of cool, but like, is this really worth it? Now that Apple's got some, their own headset, I think that we'll see some better adoption of that. But, there was the other things about just like, who you work for. And like I said, I'm super close to home. And I think that's an important part of kind of that like work-life balance, is that you enjoy what you do, and that it kind of meshes in kind of with your life, as opposed to like, there was one company that was up in like Malibu area. And I was just, or like, even like with the Dodgers, I'm like, I just can't imagine driving, to 4 hours in LA traffic every day. Like that's not good for my like mental health or like my relationship. And so it's hard to kind of find that mix of a kind of all through things and have them line up at the right time. But certainly I'm a firm believer that kind of everything happens for a reason. And as they say at Alabama, you got to trust the process.
There you go, for sure. Well, I do want to ask you though, a couple more of the, career oriented stuff. Like what would be your biggest piece of advice for currently those who are going into their fall semester of their sophomore, junior, or senior year in college?
Yeah, it's, I think it really comes down to two things. It's experience and network. The more that you can do during school, as far as internships or volunteering or projects, the better that you set yourself up for when you're going into those interviews and you're trying to compete with thousands of other college kids. The second part to that is like, and everyone says it, right? Like it's all about who you know. I found that it's really about who knows you as well. And I think probably after the first job, like that's where maybe like I did the traditional, like apply through Teamwork Online and kind of go through the interview process. Like everything after that was all about kind of my former boss knows the boss at this team and he's going to make an intro, and everything was a lot more kind of back channeled and like relationship based and kind of referrals, as opposed to kind of just hoping and praying that my resume was going to picked out from the algorithm on the website. Like I also quickly learned that a lot of teams just have to like post those jobs just legally, but a lot of the time they already have someone internally who they know that they're going to promote, or they already have this kind of like backlist of people that they want for it. And so I always tell people like, hey, look, like applying on LinkedIn or like on Teamwork is like the very first step. Like once you do that, then you got to figure out like who's hiring. Okay, who do you know that knows that person? How can you get kind of like an informal interview or kind of take that path, as opposed to just kind of waiting and hoping and wishing that you're going to get picked? But like, how can you really kind of take the initiative to show, hey, look, I really care about this. I really believe I'm the best fit. And like, I'm not going to stop until I get an answer. Right. And so that was kind of always my sales approach too. But certainly like the more people that you can, especially as a student, where you can kind of take advantage of being a student and like people are willing to kind of give back and share or help connect you with other people. That's, I mean, probably the most valuable thing, because you never know where some of those people end up going to work for in a couple of years, or who that person knows that one day you need an introduction to. And so as I've gotten older, I realized like that's really how business gets done. And really the most effective way to kind of actually get that job that you really want is, you really got to kind of buckle down and get creative, but go the extra mile. Right. When I was interviewing for a job with the Warriors, and like I sent in my resume and cover letter, and I had like a 10-page thesis paper that I wrote in grad school about like Chase Center and like all of that. And I just, attached it in there with it. And they're like, hey, look, this is amazing, right? No one else had this. You clearly show that you understand the organization, the market, all of this stuff. And so the more stuff that you can do like that in college or in grad school to kind of arm you, with ammo to use, I guess you would say, like, you never know when that stuff comes in value down the road. And so I think just dive in, get some experience. It might not be, the best thing, but as you can continue to build your resume with some logos and meet some people, that's how you put yourself in the best position.
Couldn't agree more there. I remember my thing from when I graduated from college is like, I was applying for 10 jobs a day through Teamwork Online. And I would tell other people that. They're like, you're applying for 10 jobs a night? And I'm like, oh yeah, like 10 jobs a night. Like I got to hit 200. Like that was my goal. And then I learned that after a couple of weeks of doing that and not hearing really anything back besides from a couple of teams that I knew someone who worked there, I learned that from my peers, they were going, well, yeah, if I applied for 10 jobs a night, dude, that would take me my whole night, because I'm also researching who's hiring. I'm doing all the other in-depth stuff. Whereas for me, I was changing out, my cover letter, my resume, tailoring it. Yeah, but I was just firing them off because I was going, man, they'll see it on Teamwork. They'll see it on Teamwork instead of doing the whole process. And then as I started doing the whole process, then that's when I got calls back from X, Y, and team, and then eventually got the Padres interview, which led me there. So couldn't agree more there on that hand. Do also want to ask you though, hey, working in sports, like I love it. I know you love it too, because one of the best things is you get to sell sports, but you also get some really cool stories too. So what's one of your best stories here from working in sports, either a favorite game, favorite story, meaning player, coach, somebody, with the front office, or anything overall?
Yeah. Super Bowl at SoFi was quite the experience. That had always been kind of one of my bucket list items. And so when they asked us to kind of work it, that was super special. I mean, the amount of like celebrities and, people who were at SoFi that you just kind of walk past or rub shoulders with, like Roger Goodell or Russell Wilson or Jeff Bezos, that was very unique for LA, and like the halftime performance, to be there and to witness all of that. Like, I don't know that I'll ever forget that. There was some other stuff in Oakland. We did the boat. The entire front office got on like kind of like a big party boat, and we sailed over to the Giants Stadium, which is right on the water there. And we shot like A's t-shirts out of a cannon gun into the stadium. They took us up to Seattle when we clinched a playoff spot. The entire front office, we all went up there, played golf, went to the game. And that was special because, like, especially my IS class, there was 15 of us who were all kind of fresh out of college. And so like we very much bonded, and that was a weekend where I was like, wow, like this, the team cares, and they're footing the bill for all of this. And you only see some stuff like that where the owner flies the whole staff on the team for like a finals game or something.
Yeah.
I walked past Jose Altuve one time down like in the depths of the Coliseum. That was before all their cheating stuff. And I was surprised by how I'm 5'6". I don't think I'm that big, but I was taller than him. I think one of my first days in Oakland, we had a gym that honestly was nicer than the ones that the players had at the stadium. We had one in the office, and it was probably like one of my first days. And I went in after my day and was working out, and Dave Cavill, who was the president, came and sat on the like recumbent bike right next to me and started kind of chatting me up. And that was cool for someone who was kind of just like fresh eyed to be like, wow, the president of the team is sitting down, working out with me and chatting me up. And so that was cool. Certainly SoFi, like the first game being in there, right? We had spent so much time learning that building and when it was empty and trying to sell this idea of what it's like on a game day. But until we actually like were there for that first game and it was packed and they sang the anthem and just the acoustics and all like that was pretty special too. In more recent kind of months here, like I was able to go to the Elite 11 finals. They had it in Redondo Beach and got to see arguably 20 of the best high school quarterbacks in the country, like duke it out. And so that was cool. I got to see the guy who's going to Alabama, Julian Sayin, and kind of meet him and talk to these guys about their data. And I'm hoping in a few years, like one of them gets drafted and I'd be like, I remember when I was standing on the field with him. So, it's a little bit different, right? I'm not running around in a suit and credential, and that was certainly fun, kind of sneaking into empty suites and watching the rest of the game. But I do feel now that I'm still kind of attached to that. But I get a little bit more of kind of my personal life back, which I'm kind of excited to see this kind of new chapter and working more with kind of individual athletes. And so hopefully some good new memories to come.
I can tell you my favorite memory of working a game with you was working the Super Bowl, and we're kind of helping out however we can, escorting people around, doing whatever it may be. And you and I both like see each other, say hi, kind of wave at each other, walk towards each other. And then we're literally saying hi to each other for like 2 seconds. A guy walks up with the other couple guys behind him and he goes, hey, can you help me find yada, yada. I think it was like the Cabana or whatever. And you looked at me and go, wait, you're Marlon Humphrey, Alabama corner who, was at the Super Bowl, just attending it. And he goes, yeah. And you're like, yeah, of course. And then you just start walking that way and you're just taking, so that was one of the better ones. Cause you just honestly, I would not have, all these NFL guys wear helmets, of course, like guy goes to Alabama, who's from where I live currently, Hoover, Alabama, oddly enough. I just looked it up, but I was like, man, that's just such a, I'd recognize Oklahoma State guys, I'm sure. Right. Cause I worked for the athletic department too there, but you recognizing, an Alabama guy immediately and just been like, wait, it's just such a cool thing, right? Like you never know when that's going to happen,
Yeah.
especially at the Super Bowl.
Right. I mean, Alabama is
Yeah.
NFLU. I don't think there's any arguing that. But that was funny about the Super Bowl is like anyone who was sitting in that like lower bowl, like in the club seats, like was somebody, right? And so that was pretty funny to run into him. That happened with Patrick Surtain to me the other day, maybe a couple weeks ago at UCLA. I was testing some guys and he was like, "Oh, hey, nice to meet you." I'm like, "Oh, I know exactly who you are. Like we went to school at the same time. Like you're killing in the league." So hopefully, some more of that stuff would be cool to actually kind of, because always on the team side, it was very much like, "Hey, don't talk to the players. Like you're completely separated." Like I had friends who got in trouble for like, just a little something or whatever. And so there was a very hard line between don't interact with the players. And now for me, like that's completely flipped, right? Like I want to, talk directly to athletes and spend more time with those guys as opposed to whatever administrators or compliance folks and stuff like that. Coaches have a lot of valuable time, so it's hard to deal with them, but athletes, it's a lot more kind of relatable and it's a lot more fun that way. So
yeah, for sure. It's one of the cooler things, you can interact with actual people involved. Well, being said though, I got to ask you some Alabama questions here in SEC and NIL. So, I just was watching the Johnny Football, Johnny Manziel Untold documentary on Netflix, and it was like, a bunch of it was now the NIL's real. If we would have been all good, if the NIL had been a thing back when I was in college, then I would have been fine, etc. But how do you think NIL changes? Yeah. I've got a widespread opinions on how I think it's going to change overall, but how do you think it changes like for Alabama? I mean, you're already like cream of the crop, top one of one. Does it do much difference for like the SEC and Alabama as a whole? Now the NIL is a real deal.
Yeah. I mean, look, there was always jokes about like Alabama, like giving players like new cars or whatever, right? Like,
yeah.
Where's that neon green camo coming from? So I think a lot of NIL we're seeing is that like it's just being kind of brought out of the shadows and like just out in public, right? Like a lot of this stuff was already going on for cash in bags or whatever like that. Like that was happening. I don't think that they have really figured out a good way to regulate it or formalize it. And it sounds like some of that is happening, but it is certainly kind of the wild, wild west now in terms of like who's got the richest boosters, right? And there's some aspects of it where I'm like, okay, maybe that is true. Like the argument of like it corrupts college sports and amateurism. Like I think there's maybe some truth to that. I certainly think for things like video games, jersey sales, autographs, where like it is very truly kind of an athlete's IP, like that should have been set up and done a long time ago, right? When he was talking about like all the jerseys were sold out and like he didn't see a penny of that, like I would agree that is fundamentally wrong. Is it right that, a kid could get paid $1 million just to commit to a school? Like that's, I think, is a little bit more outrageous. And it only creates more kind of chaos in terms of like the transfer portal, right? And guys leaving schools just for more money rather than the impact or the, history of the program. Like at Alabama, I think a lot of it is kind of this level of competition, and guys go to Alabama because they know on a daily basis they're going to be going up against the elite at kind of that level. And after 4 years, that only makes you better and better, right? Like that's the process. Do you now have guys who, not to say take the easy route, but like are like, oh, well, I'm going to go to this school because they're going to give me cash now, right? And so I don't know, man. It's kind of a mess, and I don't think anyone's really got it figured out. Miami has kind of gotten into some mess with some of the stuff that they're doing, kind of this back-channeling recruiting. And so like some of the rules are all different by like state or like high school to college. And I don't know. I still think it's going to take a little while to figure out. I think there will always be these top college football and basketball guys that are getting a lot of money. I think there's probably, and I don't get to make these decisions or anything like that, but I think there's a better system with like group licensing where everyone on the team, or, you know, all of the athletes across all the teams at a school get a percentage, as opposed to it really being kind of the haves and the have-nots. I think that's just fundamentally kind of more fair and equitable, for some of like kind of the non-revenue generating sports. But I think there's also a lot of creative stuff that, you know, people are now doing kind of on social where, you know, they're generating a ton of money from product endorsements and because who they are kind of as an athlete too, but maybe not necessarily getting paid. You're not supposed to do it, but pay for play on the field. Right. So I don't know, man, I think it's all kind of a mess. I don't think anyone's got it completely figured out, but I think there are some schools, some collectives, that are doing it better than others. But I think, I mean, with all the conference realignment stuff, like everyone's chasing money. I think all of this comes down to people chasing money. And so guys want to go to big time schools where they're playing big time games and they get cash for it. And the teams want to go play in these conferences that have these deals with these mega media rights, right? Because they want that payout each year. Then you go back to that argument of kind of like money ruins college football. Like now you're seeing like the Pac-12 basically kind of dissolve and like in a lifeboat. And again, it's because like, you know, teams are chasing media money. And so I don't know. I think there's so many schools. The college football national championship is going to expand. But I don't even think they have that. They're like, okay, we want more teams again for more media money. But how do you actually kind of figure out who should be in that? And the committee has been kind of, I don't know. It seems like we get some of the same schools, and obviously I love that Alabama is always in it. We should be, but a little bit more parity, let's call it, in terms of like even the Power 25 schools, or like, you know, the top ones. But from there's even so many other schools that I think we'll probably see that like don't have a team in the next few years. I saw some video from Arizona State where he was like, some booster gave $1 million and he was like, that's why we have a team on the field right now. Without him, like we don't. And that's Arizona State. That's not like Northern Arizona University. Like that's a big program. And so they're going to rely on having to bring in money to bring these top recruits in. And I think at some point it's just going to get ridiculous. I mean, it probably already has on some of these, like ridiculous, the value, especially when it's like a kid that's coming in that hasn't really proved much to that point. Right. I don't know, man. I don't have the answers. I'm glad I don't have to figure them out, but I can, I'm certainly kind of involved in it and see it from kind of a lower level than what's going on in those conversations at the top.
Yeah, no,
But it's overall, I think it's good, right? Like it's finally at the point where like they are making money, because like, yes, some schools do a really good job of providing that like cost of living, you know, offset with housing and food, but like not every school provides the same or like has the amenities that Alabama does. And there are really student athletes out there who are struggling to get by right on a daily basis and don't have food. And so like, that's fundamentally wrong. But there are some schools that just have more money than they know what to do with it and they have to spend it. And so I think we'll see a lot more kind of parity, whether it's like, hey, the top 25 schools kind of create their own. It's like Super League, right? Like in soccer, or like if there's some relegate, like it'll be interesting to see how conference realignment starts to impact which schools really kind of cement themselves as like perennial, and who kind of struggles to keep up.
No, I think you're right. I think we could see much more of like, who was it, the Alabama running back from last year? Was that, I forget who it was, but he he transferred from, I want to say Toledo before, or another small school like in the Southeast. I don't think it was Toledo. I think it was a smaller school in the Southeast. I just think we'll see more of that, but it'll go, instead of it being from a smaller school that I don't know, it'll be from Big 12 or a Pac-12, whatever the Pac-12 ends up being, or it could be, you know, these guys are transferring from Oklahoma State to, you know, Ohio State whenever the defensive coordinator leaves and goes to Ohio State to be the defensive coordinator, because now it's Jim Knowles, Oklahoma State's defensive coordinator, went to Ohio State and took 2 recruits with him. Now, I don't know if that was NIL money or if that was just like, hey, Noel said, hey, you guys come here, like you'll definitely have a chance at starting. You'll at least be able to compete, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But I think we'll see stuff like that go on more and more with the NIL. It'll be, okay, you could go to this one school to start, and then because now you're playing really well, you'll get NIL money to, be the Vance Ford dealerships, player of the game.
School, and then go to another
and
school.
And just keep transferring, and then have that 5th year as a grad transfer where you don't have to wait out a year again. So I think that'll just open up the doors.
By all means, like, it's a small window, like, for these guys to kind of maximize the opportunity of when they are, this top athlete. And most guys don't go to the next level. And most guys who do go to the next level don't, have this entire super long career, right? Like, it's a very small amount. So maximize your opportunity to make as much money possible off of your NIL and your athletic kind of association while you can. So, like, I wouldn't fault anyone for that. But yeah, I think we'll start kind of more of this revolving door with college athletes. And I don't know, primarily it's been a lot of football stuff. I don't know that maybe it'll kind of go into basketball a little bit more. But it'll just be interesting for this football season, kind of how things shake around.
For sure. Yeah. I'm curious how many schools will in the future here, if and when they're able to do it, will start going kind of like the Notre Dame model where you're independent for football, but the rest of the sports you're in a conference, so be interesting to see how that goes too with conference realignment in the future, or even if that does happen to be a thing. I mean, Kentucky wouldn't want that to be a thing for football, but they'd love it for basketball, for example, right? So never know,
right.
Yeah. And then on, Alabama, like, would love it for football, would probably still be killing it for basketball, but you've got Auburn who'd be going football for sure, and then basketball every so often they'd be saying, yeah, let's do it or not. So always interesting there.
Yeah.
I do want to get you out of here on this, though. Alabama, how are they going to do this year? I mean, Georgia, I know they're, back-to-back title winners, but they have a new quarterback. Alabama has a new quarterback situation as well here. But Alabama, as you said, NFLU, I mean, Alabama's always right there. It seems like they're preseason AP top 5 every year, and this year's no different. So what are you thinking? Win the whole thing? Win the SEC West? What's in the cards here?
So yeah, I'm picking them to win the whole thing, and there's 2 reasons for that. The first is, if you look back historically, like when Alabama has gotten beat or like had a record the way they kind of did last year, they tend to bounce back and win it all the following year. I was watching something about Kirk Herbstreit was talking about that, and they're going to be down in, I think they're going to do game day for the Texas game. I'm actually going to go down there too in a couple of weeks. So that'll be a really good kind of first test. But I think, if they could run the whole gauntlet and go undefeated and do it the whole way this year, like, I think the cards line up for that. Also, I've been seeing a lot of videos of Nick Saban smiling, like, during his press conferences or making jokes. And whenever that happens, that means that, things are bad for other teams. Let's put it that way. And so seeing a happy Saban, I think is something that's promising, because you don't see it a lot. And so I think, I've watched a little bit of some of like the practice stuff. I think Jalen Milroe is probably going to be the starter. I don't know. He's been there for a while, but it seems like he's made a lot of progress. That's the thing of Alabama, right? It's just like every year it kind of reloads and restacks, and the next guy up is almost just as good as the guy that just went to the NFL. And so it'll be interesting to see kind of like who emerges, what that competition is like. But I'm going to put my bets down here that, yes, they win the whole thing, college football national championship, add another trophy to the case. Saban looks like he's got him primed and ready. So I'm excited for college football, man. I've missed it for a while. I was really hoping that for the game at SoFi that Alabama was going to come out there, so I don't have to go fly out to Tuscaloosa. You can't expect to win it every year, right? That's obviously the goal. But I think we're overdue for one. So this upcoming year is going to be a good one. Roll Tide.
It's got to be, yeah. I'm going to try to go to that Alabama Crimson Tide versus Texas game myself here. See if I can somehow finagle a way to get a ticket for cheaper than $300. But it looks like it's currently possible, barely, on Ticketmaster. So we'll see. But yeah, well, I'll hit you up when you come out then. Should be a good time.
It's like the first time in 120 years. Yeah, that Texas has been out there. I was like, I gotta go for that. If there was one game, it's been enough time now where I kind of miss campus and I want to see all the new stuff. I was like, all right, hey, we're going for that one. We can't miss that one. So
yeah, it's only a short 45-minute drive from where I'm at, so not too bad. But I'll have to make a trip. So, hey, Jory, thanks so much here as always for joining here on the latest episode of the podcast. Please follow at the CGA Tour on Twitter and Instagram, as well as wherever you listen to podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, SoundCloud, etc., and iTunes. And we'll catch you again soon. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Calvin.